Can you talk about, there was not only this letter, but then there was also a revelation in the documentary from a band member outside of the family saying that the senior Menendez father had also abused him. Can you talk about how this can play into the case and reopening it?
Well, obviously, now with the prosecutor coming out and saying he's going to review this evidence, it's played in a major way. What we're looking at now is a petition that was filed like a year ago saying, there's newly discovered evidence. It's a collateral attack. They're coming after all these direct appeals were exhausted, coming in from the side and saying, this needs to be looked at again. This is evidence that if a jury had heard it, could make a difference. And you have a letter from Eric Menendez before the time of the shootings, where he says that he was abused by his dad. That corroborates what he had to say and what he would have said if there'd been more abuse evidence in the second trial. And then, of course, you have yet another piece of evidence, which is an alleged victim of Jose Menendez. And again, that could be compelling evidence. We're looking at decades later, but the fact of the matter is we all want fairness in the system. And that's what they're asking for. And the prosecutor at least has said, we'll take a look.
So we just heard from the district attorney there. He has said this evidence could allow the brothers to be retried, resentenced, or released even from custody. Explain what path you think the prosecutors will take and what the difference really is.
Well, they've got a hearing, at least right now, that's set for late October. They're going to take a look at whether or not they find it to be credible. I mean, how do you look at a letter from that long ago and say, is it accurate, credible, et cetera, to get handwriting analysis? Those are kinds of things to look at. It was found after the convictions. And again, this alleged victim was gone on record in the documentary saying that he was abused by Jose Menendez. So first they evaluate, and then second they say, are we going to allow for an evidentiary hearing? Are we going to say there should be a resentencing? This evidence should be put into play at the sentencing hearing. Or should there be another trial? I mean, that would be a major undertaking all these years later. And then they also look at whether or not there's any other alternative. But the fact is, this Netflix documentary has been huge. And is it a coincidence they're looking at this now and coming out publicly and saying, well, we'll review it? No, because public attention dictates this. There's also a second documentary coming out this weekend about the case on Netflix. So their basic role is they win, the prosecutor wins when justice is done. And what he is doing, I think, is very reasonable under the circumstances.
I find it so fascinating because I feel like in the 2000s, it was all about reopening cases with DNA evidence, right? Now we have this Netflix documentary. You have Kim Kardashian coming out making statements about this. This all comes on the heels of things like the podcast Serial. How is the media playing into this now? And is this a trend we'll see continue?
Oh, I think so. I think it's just going to expand exponentially. When we look at years ago when things were just newspaper, evening news, whatever. Now we have 24/7 news. And we also have, of course, Netflix, podcasts, TikTok, social media. Look at the Johnny Depp case.
Yeah,
that just was an avalanche in his favor on TikTok. I mean, he looked like he should be, rule the world. Everybody loved him so, right? And so now look at this case. I mean, you look at all of just the adoration, of these figures, these handsome young men back at the time being abused and being misunderstood. And now many people want to come out to their defense. On the other hand, you have a lot of people saying this was a horrible crime, that they were rich kids and went out and bought Rolexes and cars and private tennis lessons and restaurants and things like that. There's always, like my grandma said, nothing in life can be sliced so thin it doesn't have two sides. But the side we're hearing right now favors the Menendez brothers.
And you've actually written a book about big cases, high-profile cases that have gotten a lot of attention on social media, so you know all about that. But let's talk about how this would actually play into the case. Let's say the jury was able to hear about the letter and about this new evidence. How does that change the fact that they killed their parents and the potential sentencing?
Well, they call it imperfect self-defense, and it's like it came out of what was called the battered women syndrome, and then, of course, battered person syndrome, et cetera. And it basically says, I suffered abuse and I felt threatened. I'm not immediately threatened like a gun to my head at the time when I shot, but I've got this self-defense nevertheless. It would mitigate at least down to a manslaughter, far less than life without parole on murder one for both of them. So that's one way it could play out. Remember, the first trial was on Court TV, and also had this quote-unquote abuse excuse with Leslie Abramson as counsel. Second trial, no TV cameras and no two separate juries, one jury, and very little evidence about abuse. So how would this play out now? It's a big difference from the second trial, and something that I think a lot of people think should be considered in all fairness.
I think the way we view sexual abuse victims too has changed over the years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, unfortunately we're running out of time.
Anne, thank you.
It's changed so much, and I think that's a big factor too. Excellent point.
Anne, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate
My
your
pleasure.
insight. The time right now.